Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbity Bobbity Books. My name is Ellie and today I thought it would be fun to recommend to you some books. So I'm going to be doing a book recommendations video based on different types of love. So of course we're going into the month of February and we have Valentine's Day in February, so I was just thinking about videos to do and I wanted to do something that was based on the idea of love, and I just thought it would be fun to recommend to you some books based on different kinds of love. So I'm going to be talking about books that have parental love or sibling love or platonic love, or of course romantic love in there. And yes, I hope that you find a book that you will enjoy from this video. Anyway, without further ado, I'm just going to jump straight in and start recommending to you some books. So the first sort of prompt that I'm going to be talking about is Maternal Love, and a book that I think would fit this perfectly is Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. So this is the first book in a new adult fantasy series that's based on Norse mythology. And this book is set on Vigrid, which is this battle plane where the gods fell, which is very cool. And in this story we follow three main perspectives. The first of which is one of my favourite characters, who is a woman called Orca, and she is a very fierce, very morally grey character who will literally stop at nothing to protect her son. So for that reason I think this is perfect for the prompt of maternal love, because I honestly can't think of anyone who is more devoted to her family than Orca, even if it does kind of blindsight her a little bit at times and she is a little bit scary, but she's also a fantastic character to read about. For those of you who are interested, there are also two other main perspectives in here. One is a character called Varg, who starts off as a slave and ends up breaking away from his captor, and he is very much driven by his quest to kind of avenge his sister. And then we also have another female perspective in here, who is a woman called Elvar, and she is a very skilled warrior and she is trying to win her battle fame in the acclaimed Battle Grimm. So we've got some really interesting characters in here, and I did enjoy this book. I think what I enjoyed most was the setting. I love the fact that it was Norse inspired, and we also had lots of mythical creatures and things in here which were really fun to read about. It's quite violent, I will say, so if you're a fan of action scenes and sort of hand-to-hand combat, then you're really going to enjoy this one. But if you're not a fan of blood and gore and guts and stuff, then you might want to steer clear. But yes, overall I thought this was a really solid start to a new fantasy series, and I'm really excited to see kind of how things move on from here. The next prompt that I want to talk about is Paternal Love. Now for this one I am going to choose The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Now this story doesn't contain a biological father in it, but it does contain a man called Arthur who runs this orphanage for magically gifted children, and he is very much kind of a father figure to them. So for that reason I have chosen this book for that prompt. I am sure you've heard of this story before because I've talked about it quite a lot on my channel, and I know a lot of other people have spoken about this book because it's been really well received, which is fantastic. But if you haven't, this is a standalone adult fantasy book, and in this story we follow a man called Linus Baker, who is a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth. So his job is basically to go around and visit different orphanages which house magical children to make sure that they are all running safely. And one day Linus Baker basically gets called up by his managers, who decide to send him to the House in the Cerulean Sea, which is this orphanage which houses the most dangerous magical children. And so in this story we follow Linus as he goes to visit the House in the Cerulean Sea, and he obviously gets to know the children who live there and the man who runs the orphanage, and it turns into a very sweet and wholesome story about him trying to question the rules that he has always lived by. It is such an uplifting and beautiful story. There's also a very sweet queer romance story in here as well, so yes, highly recommend if you haven't already got to this one. Okay, so the next book that I want to recommend to you is a book that contains sibling love, and the one that I've chosen is Daughter of the Forest by Juliette Marillier. So this is a adult fantasy book and it's the first in the Seven Waters series, but I think you can absolutely read this as a standalone if you don't want to get into a new series, because everything is wrapped up at the end. But this story is a retelling. It's a retelling of the Six Swan Brothers fairy tale, and in this book we basically follow our main character Sorka, as she is trying to break this curse that was placed upon her 6 brothers. So her brothers were cursed by this evil enchantress who turned them into swans, and her brothers can only visit Sorka and take their human form twice a year. The thing that I enjoyed most about this story was absolutely the sibling dynamic. I really enjoyed seeing Sorka interacting with her 6 brothers in the beginning of the book, and we really saw what a fantastic relationship she had with each of them, and her just utter devotion and love for her brothers was so inspiring in this book, because honestly she has to go through so much in this story. It's pretty dark at times. She has to go through some pretty harrowing stuff, so I would definitely recommend checking out the content warnings before going into this book, because there are some pretty difficult scenes to read. But overall this was an absolutely beautiful book. I loved the setting as well, because this is set in medieval Ireland, so we've got lots of gorgeous descriptions of the forest, and we have those kind of historical elements in there as well. So if you are a fan of historical fiction and are looking to try fantasy, this one might be quite a good one for you. But yes, I really enjoyed this story. It's quite slow though. It's quite a long book. It is quite slow, so I don't think it will be for everybody, but if you think it sounds interesting, I would definitely recommend picking it up. Okay, so the next book that I want to recommend to you is a book that contains platonic love, and for that I am going to choose Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine, written by Gail Honeyman. So this is a contemporary novel where we follow a woman called Eleanor who lives a very isolated life. So she struggles to socialise, she struggles to make connections with other people, she doesn't really have any friends. Her co-workers very much keep her at arm's length because they think that she's a little bit odd, and she lives a very kind of structured life where she goes to work every day, she has the same lunch every day, and then on the weekend she goes home and drinks too much vodka. Then one day her structured routine is very much disrupted when she decides to help her co-worker Raymond help this old man who's fallen over on the street. And after that incident they are kind of tied together really, and Eleanor starts to form a budding relationship with this co-worker Raymond, and he helps her to see that perhaps her life isn't quite as fine as she thought it was. This is such a moving story, and at its heart is a beautiful friendship, and for that reason I think this is perfect if you're looking for something that contains platonic love. The next book that I want to recommend to you is a book that contains self-love, and for that I have decided to choose A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas. So this is the 4th book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and yes, the first 3 books kind of form their own trilogy, but you do have to have read those before you go into this 4th book, even though this follows a different protagonist and a different storyline, just because you kind of need the context of the first 3 books really before you go into this one. But yes, I really enjoyed this book. This is Nesta's book. So Nesta is a side character from the first trilogy. She is actually Feyre's sister, so Feyre is the protagonist in the first 3 books. And yes, we see her character development in here, and the reason why I picked this one for the prompt of self-love is because a huge focus of this book is basically about Nesta trying to overcome the trauma of her past. She's having to confront herself, she's having to learn new coping strategies, and she's really having to find her place in this world that she's kind of been thrust into against her will. And yes, it's really beautiful to see her character arc through here, although it was quite difficult to read at times because you spend a lot of time in Nesta's head, which isn't always a very nice place to be, particularly in the beginning of the book. But yes, it is really wonderful seeing her sort of recovery really. So there's a lot of mental health rep in here, and I obviously can't talk too much about the actual plot of this one because it's the 4th book in a series. I would highly recommend the Court of Thorns and Roses series actually if you haven't given it a go. It's a fantasy romance series. I think it's marketed as YA, the first 3 books, but this one is adult. It's quite steamy, so if you're into kind of smutty romance scenes, then I would recommend this series as a whole. And yes, it's a lot of fun. It contains a lot of really great characters in my opinion, so yes. that's that one. And then the final book that I wanted to recommend to you was a book that contains romantic love. Now, I am not a big sort of straight up romance reader, so I didn't have a huge amount to pick from here, but I'm going to recommend to you one that I read recently and I did really enjoy, and that is Get a Life, Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this is a very popular book. I'm sure you've probably heard of it before, but it's the first book in a romance series where each book follows a different sister from the Brown family. So in this book we're obviously following Chloe, and Chloe is a young woman who thinks that her life has always been quite safe and been quite boring, and then one day she has a near-death experience, and so she realizes that she needs to shake things up a bit. So she decides to write a list of things that she wants to achieve in order to essentially get a life, and one of the first things that she does is she moves out into her own apartment, and that is where she meets her love interest, who is the superintendent of her building, who is a man called Red, and a romance kind of follows on. Red is basically trying to help Chloe tick off all the things on her list, and it just turns into a very sweet romance. I really enjoyed both characters in here. They both had quite a lot going on in their lives. So Chloe is a woman with fibromyalgia, so she is having to deal with her symptoms of chronic fatigue and chronic pain on a daily basis. And then we've got Red, who is a man who is coming out of his own toxic relationship. He's also a budding artist, and yes, I really enjoyed how the both of them supported each other, and they really used their words to communicate with each other, which makes a nice change from some other romance books I've read before. So yes, I really enjoyed this one. It was a really fun romance story, some great steamy scenes if you're into that, and also it just felt a little bit more weighty than some contemporary romances that I've read before, I think because the characters felt more real and more complex, which I enjoyed. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you have found a recommendation from this. If you have any suggestions of any books that contain different types of love in, please let me know in the comments, because I'm always looking for recommendations. I really hope that you have a fabulous February, and I guess I will see you next time with another video. Bye!